Alright, so I appreciate we're over 2 weeks into April now, but today I want to do the Super Q&A for March, the end of March. So throughout that month, I gathered questions from you guys over on my Patreon page, and I have resolved to answer every single one of them. So hopefully you guys find some interesting stuff here. I'm also going to mix in a couple of comments just from the general community, because I didn't actually get that many on Patreon, and if I were to answer all of them, which I will here, I don't really think that the length will be that super, so I'll expand it a bit since that page isn't that filled up. So here's what you've got coming in the next few days. The end of the Stellaris season. You've seen like 2/3 of Stellaris, and realistically, you could have seen it all today if I'd had the confidence to upload one per day. But I still seem to be struggling with anxiety over that. Scared that people don't want to watch it because they want more Guild Wars stuff, and then I spread the releases out too much. I'm trying to get over that impulse this year. I will work on it. Just as I said at the start of the year, I want to do things different here, and that means spamming things out. There is a new series which is coming, which is already 100% finished, and you can watch on the drive for any Patreon followers, and the uploads will be rolling out very soon. It's 13 episodes long, with 2 additional videos afterwards, and it's based on Guild Wars 1, which you can see from the footage in the background I'm playing at the moment. I'm on a huge Guild Wars 1 kick at the moment, and it perfectly aligns because of the Guild Wars 2 expansion. The series is a playthrough of Cantha, and so I've already done that, obviously, and I've done it in a very comprehensive way that I'm very proud of, but I've learned something about the internet. People kind of don't care and will happily accept the same regurgitated information over and over again, just as long as there's a few years between them. Which is sad in some ways, but in another way gives me some confidence. Many of you guys will want to watch Factions. Nonetheless, this is me, and I didn't want to go completely in circles. So the new Faction series is very different to the original one. You will actually be able to watch the new series and the old series, and they'll complement each other. Seriously. But the main thing I'm doing is I'm doing a Factions playthrough with the specific demo in mind of new people to the franchise and drifted Guild Wars 1 people, so that you can remember what happened on that continent and in what order, or just learn what happened in that continent and in what order. If you are sitting there scratching your head wondering, is it really an exciting time to be a Guild Wars fan? What is so great about Cantha? This series will answer that question for you. This series will mean that you no longer feel like an outsider, but you're in the loop and you know what to expect and all those fun things. I remember, obviously, ArenaNet gave us a tiny window for the announcement of Path of Fire, and I couldn't really produce many great series about it. But I did get a couple of videos out talking about a few key facts, and I remember when the Path of Fire expansion came out, I had a lot of really sincere, happy comments from people who were saying, oh my god, I got to this moment in Path of Fire, and I swear to god, I would have had no idea what I was looking at. But I saw your video before I played it, and I had this context, and it was really fun, and I really wanted to know what you thought of it. That happens with me in Living World a lot as well. This Cantha series, I can actually produce because the devs have given us a big enough gap to do that and to actually filter that out. If you think about it, I could have done it with Heart of Thorns as well, but all we knew about Heart of Thorns is we were going to the Maguma jungle, which is just a couple of maps, and I did do videos on those couple of maps, but it's nowhere near the same. So, a new Faction series. It's really surreal, I can't believe I'm saying it, and I'll give more of an explanation about it. But that's coming up. Another thing that you'll be watching as well, so that's Stellaris and the Factions playthrough going together. Then also, you're going to see Tribulation Mode. Obviously, the Super Adventure Box is out right now. And I have to be honest, guys, I'm really out of the loop with actual Guild Wars 2 at the moment. Since the most recent patch, which I haven't actually made a video for you guys about, where you're escorting the tank and they've reintroduced the Living World episode stuff, I've barely played. That's why I haven't seen a video, because I've barely played it. I feel very out of touch with Guild Wars 2 at the moment. And crucially, obviously, the coronavirus, the studio's shut, and nothing much is going on. I remember that ArenaNet did announce there'd be updates to the box this year, but looking at the patch notes on the wiki, I can't see if there are any. So genuinely, I have no idea if there's anything to cover there. Fortunately, I have already got this Tribulation Mode playthrough, so you guys will be able to watch through that. That'll be a nice Guild Wars 2 bit of content for you too, while I work on what I'm doing this week, and that's Arena. So yeah, we're getting back to Arena, as I said, and then once Arena's done, we're actually a good chunk through Arena for what it's worth. I'm really excited to get back to Elder Scrolls, because I haven't played it since like February, and once we get back to Arena, we can look forward to bringing back Season 2 and so on. So that's kind of the state of things. That's where I am right now. I am obviously taking a break from streaming at the moment. I've got to figure out what makes me happy streaming. And I think the idea of doing alternate MMOs is still on my radar, but I'll have news for you when I've actually decided. Sorry that Stellaris has gone up a little bit jagged and a little bit slow. It's just the way it goes sometimes. So let's head on over to the questions, and there's some fun ones. Starting off with Arabax, who said 4 weeks ago, can you name all of the elements in Asuruk without looking them up? This is a weird question, a very simple one that I would not have expected. For those who didn't see my Asuruk series, because it was a very obscure Xbox game, I actually think it's brilliantly made. They had a system whereby you could attune to 4 different elements. You remember how the original Xbox controller, even contemporary Xbox controllers, they have colors on the thumb buttons. So X is blue, right? And Y is yellow, and B is red, and A is green. Well, in Asuruk, each of the colors on the controller actually were associated with an element in-game. So those are easy, I can get those. A, green was earth, then you had water with blue, you had air with yellow, and you had fire with red, right? So those are the 4 base ones. But then Asuruk allowed you to press multiple buttons at once, which would combine the 2 elements. And then there was a whole other layer of elements on there, which is a brilliant system that I spend a long time thinking about. And then you could even like triple combine elements. So what of the combinations do I remember? I remember that there's steam. I remember there's acid. I remember that there's... Oh god, I'm already struggling. The thing that's weird is when you get to some combos, like the armor combos, it was, you know, a little bit different. So you had ice was one as well. Then there was what they called whirlwind, I think, or did they call it tempest? It was basically the idea of like tornado attunement. So there was one of those. There was lightning that you could utilize as well. You could combine all of them for that big magic explosive attack that I only demonstrated like right towards the end of the whole series. There was like the lava armor. So molten, I think, was basically one of the elements. I think that's it. Oh, and then there was like a lightning attack, and then there was also like a force attack, wasn't there? There was like a barrier kind of, you know, pulsing tempest thing, and that was a really cool element because it would actually pulse the controller in a cool way. Man, they did some great things with the controller in that game. So yeah, that's what I remember. I guess you're into Asuruk at the moment. I still recommend people watch it, by the way. If you're bored, stuck in at home or whatever, go check out the Asuruk series and look at the comments, because there's an ArenaNet dev who still to this day is at the studio, as far as I know, giving a running commentary alongside mine because he made the game. Seriously, very cool. Next, we got a question from Balks11, who says, hey WP, do you still use your Oculus Rift? Didn't we get this in the previous Super Q&A? So I give a massive answer. The answer is, or maybe I got this on streams. The answer is no. And realistically, I fell out of touch with that community and that industry even several years ago when they started transitioning to motion controls and going along with that. I just didn't have the space, and a lot of the peripherals became quite expensive. People also started leaning a little bit more on the Vive at that time, and I felt like a bit of an outsider, wasn't sure if I really wanted to take the plunge, and I hadn't got as much use out of my full release Oculus Rift as I thought I was going to, so I drifted. It's funny, I generally still think of the Vive as the better machine, but it's not even the most popular anymore. According to the Steam library stats, I think I saw this on a VR subreddit recently, it's the newest release, the Rift S, most people have. I really had a lot of fun ideas for making videos, but at the time, it was a real nuisance to do so. I still think, by the way, to anyone listening to my voice, if you want to get into what I'm doing, if you think this might be a thing for you, you need to find a niche or an area that you believe will flourish in the future. And I still think VR is a great place to look at. I think VR is a ticking time bomb. Now, I know that there's a lot of cynics out there, and I know that many of us, myself included, have probably jumped the gun several times in the past, suggesting that it as a phenomenon is going to do more sooner than it has. But the truth is, the industry is growing and getting bigger, and slowly but surely over time, the library of software is being built and the options for hardware is being built to complement one another. You know, when you're looking at some totally new industry like this, you're in a chicken and the egg situation. Why would people buy the hardware if there's no software? Why would people build the software if there's no hardware? And you're only ever going to snatch at that in small victories over several years. But there will be a point where the curve suddenly rockets up in a much more exciting way. I don't think that this is like any other VR hype phase that's occurred like in the early 90s or in the 80s or whatever. VR as we know it now has latched on enough to stay and grow, and I think of it as a ticking time bomb. I think it'd be a great thing to cover. Maybe there's a version of myself that by the year 2021 or later has really decided to dive in again. But for now, I wouldn't say I'm an authority on the subject or anything, just an enthusiast, and a distant one at that. Suvrek says, 3 very important questions for you. What's your favorite potato-related dish? If you got the opportunity to be one of the first people to colonize Mars, would you? And what would be the thing you could contribute to such a colony, if anything? All right, well, I don't think I could contribute anything to a Mars colony. But I also think that's exactly the kind of thing I would want to do. And I know some people say, well, what the hell? That's a miserable idea. You're stuck in a tin can for like 2 years is the travel time or something. Maybe it's 2 years round trip. Very high chance of dying. There's absolutely nothing going on, so on, so on, so on. And yeah, sure, if you're going to be a pragmatist, it sounds like a horrendous thing to dedicate your life to. But on the other hand, that would be something truly impactful for humanity. That would be something absolutely at the cutting edge of what humans as a species have ever been able to do. And there's something wonderful and fantastic and meaningful in that. I think no matter what way you cut it, we're all looking for would rather have a deeper meaning. You know, many of us get distracted by frivolous nonsense like covering video games on YouTube. But when you really come down to it, if I could just choose a career, if I could just choose a purpose or an impact from me on Earth, I would pick participating in some grand project like this every time. I have no technical skills that would be applicable at the moment, obviously, but if I was going to choose to dedicate myself to something to have a technical skill, maybe this is a bit unoriginal and putting myself in a box, but the idea of going into IT and setting up network infrastructure, basically creating the Martian internet, would be kind of interesting, right? You get to this colony when it's hit, you know, somewhere around 20,000 to 100,000 people across the whole globe, and maybe there's various inception points on different areas they need to communicate, and you're basically building this new internet. That's one of those things that's always fascinated me, thinking about a situation where we have a well-established Mars colony, lots of people, millions of people are living there now. You would have kind of these two different networks, and how that would work, how they would then communicate with one another and stuff, is really, really, really fascinating to me, and something I can kind of relate to from some of my training in real life. So yeah, I know that's a boring answer. It'd be very easy to say, I'd like to learn how to terraform and make it rain for the first time again on Mars, but I'm being a little bit more realistic than these heady, super futuristic goals. Ails says, hi WP, things are getting pretty exciting with the new Guild Wars 2 releases being pretty strong and the expansion being in the pipeline. I'm enjoying a lot of the videos in preparation for Cantha, but today my question is about Stellaris, because your LP motivated me to buy the game. So, Stellaris has a large modding community and you're playing a version modded by yourself. Do you have any recommendation? Any community mod that you think adds significantly to the experience? I'm not looking for overly difficult challenges, but rather modifications that in general you think enrich the experience. So I do have some recommendations, but here's a couple of caveats for you, and I'm glad you're playing the game and enjoying it now. You sent this message 3 weeks ago, so I don't know if you've stopped already. Here's the thing. I was a really big Stellaris fan, and then when Path of Fire came out, a day after Guild Wars 2 Path of Fire, Apocalypse came out. But I played Guild Wars 2 and Path of Fire, obviously. And so I didn't really play much of the Apocalypse story. Then, later on, when Megacorp came out, I didn't play too much Megacorp either. Megacorp changed the game massively. So then there's this series you're watching, where I've taken the time to relearn it, and I generally know what I'm doing, but I'm not that great anymore. I'm not great enough that I would be confident recommending a mod to any of the new features. So planetary management changed a ton in that game. And because I haven't really wrestled with it properly, because I haven't figured out the true underlying like push and pull of the balance, I kind of don't want to touch it, and I kind of don't want to recommend. And a lot of mods these days are building into stuff like the new planetary management or some of the new resources and economies. And I haven't played a modded edition of the latest versions of the game. Now, you might think, well, is that really a big deal? Maybe not. But then there's the other fact that this little series you're watching, just after I finished recording the series that is currently uploading on YouTube, they had this Federations expansion, which I've read the patch notes and the feature lists and all that stuff, and it all looked very exciting, and there was a lot to think about. But I haven't played Federations, so that's now another layer that I wouldn't know really where to go for mods. That said, I have thought about the topic a lot, and there are some that would translate. The first one that comes to my mind is just more empires. So you know how in my Stellaris playthrough, it's all the Guild Wars 2 races battling in space. I built that, obviously. What someone else did is they took all the different vanilla designs for different kinds of aliens in Stellaris, and all the rooms and backgrounds and civics and builds, and put them all into the game in an expanded way. So the way that the game works is it will try and load in some preset empires, and then it will fill in some other ones with a totally randomly generated one. But the way that the Stellaris devs made the random generator is awful. And so even though they're supposedly randomly generated, most of them are constantly repeating, and you don't get much variety in personalities and authorities and so on. So what Just More Empires does is, using entirely vanilla stuff, it rounds out the roster of all these empires, so you don't have to rely on the randomly generated ones. And then it gives us, you know, some lore and stuff for each of them too. There's a version of Just More Empires called Just More Empires Expanded. And what that does is that one is not achievement compatible, but it is based on loads of custom-made rooms and flags. And so basically the community made a bunch of minor mods that allow you to tweak empires more. And then the Just More Empires Expanded variant relies on those. And it's really cohesive, and it's really seamless, and it's really good. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. There's a lot of UI mods that are worth looking at. Unfortunately, the Stellaris modding community has never made a good UI mod for flavor purposes. This was actually one of the things when I was concepting out my YouTube series I wanted to do for you all, but never did in the end, because the mods that I did make and what I learned to code took so long, as you've heard the story already. But I like the idea in Stellaris of a UI mod that is not entirely about functionality, which is what they all are, obviously. It's just players obsessed over optimization and their own efficiency. I like the idea of one that makes your empire flag a bit more prominent on screen, or makes the species you're playing and the space for their animations and their graphics to be a bit bigger, and for the various moments where you get dialogue and events and art. There's so much amazing art in Stellaris, but a lot of it is not handled well by the UI to enforce it and show you it properly. Planetary view especially. I would love a UI mod that changes the planetary view UI to more emphasize the graphics on the ground of the planet and stuff, especially since they changed it and you get no real sense of its geography anymore. So no one's ever made that, and I wish I could recommend it, but they haven't. I could actually probably talk a really long time about Stellaris mods, but those are the first ones that come to mind, and since the next question is about Stellaris 2, I'll move on to it. So Grokolot says, hey WP, I have to say your Stellaris playthrough has inspired me to pick up the game. However, when I went to Steam, I was overloaded with things to buy. Some I assume were expansions, some DLC, without forking out an entire fortune for everything. Could you run through which components are worth buying? And P.S., you do realise that if Boots remembers exactly when and where you met, you're going to look like such a bad friend. Well, I probably am a bad friend. I haven't spoken to Boots, like, all month. And both of us know that we want to get together and do this elite speculation stuff for Cantha. I guess I kind of went crazy with all the other Cantha productions so far, especially considering you've got all these new ones coming up very soon. So, as for Stellaris and all the individual little components, I actually am not really qualified to answer this, because I just got these as they released as time went forwards. I would say be cautious of the species packs. You don't necessarily need them. So Plantoids was the first of them and is the most basic. It's literally just like a new ship set and a new kind of species type that you can play. It doesn't impact the game any further than that though. So it's just, do you think these look pretty? Buy them if you do. That's the whole idea. Later with the Lithoids pack and the Mammals pack, they do a couple of extra things. Lithoids particularly, like if you pick that species, you actually get gameplay changes. They don't use regular food, they use minerals and stuff. And, you know, again, it's got the graphical side to them, but they're not really essential. And I think that if you're just getting into the game, I wouldn't pick them up. I actually really don't think you should pick them up, because if you're a new player and you just decide you want to play a Lithoid because you think they look cool, you might not realize that you've just fundamentally changed the mechanics of the game in a way that won't teach you what it was all about. The game's already complex enough without that accidentally happening. So I'd avoid those. And a lot of people who are just interested in like being good at the game and stuff, I think they mostly recommend Utopia because you get Ascension perk slots and, you know, people like mega structures and stuff like that. But really, I would look at the expansions and the key bullet points about what they do and decide if you want to go for it. But I also think playing vanilla is totally valid. And I think of all my recommendations I've just given to you, I would say play vanilla. I had an idea with my Stellaris series where I was going to play vanilla. Stellaris is so amazing as a game, guys. Honestly, I really thought that one thing I could have done with my YouTube channel this year is produce a mini series of Stellaris vanilla, and then a whole new playthrough with a whole new authority and ethics and everything, but with one expansion, and then do it again with another expansion. And each time the new Empire I play is completely different and can even key into that particular expansion's features. And you would have a wild time at a different time each go around that is unique and distinct. And finally, you know, after many mini-series, I could have caught up with where the game is now in 2020. But I wanted to keep it more piecemeal. I was more interested in doing the Tyrian thing, and I just did it with everything installed. Don't be scared to play that game vanilla. It's so big and complicated and ridiculous in many ways. It's better to start from there, just so that all the other feature creep doesn't blur your vision. Scrabat says, AWP, are you going to read another Guild Wars 2 book before the Cantha release? With a smiley face. I've had this question a lot. Again, I feel like it was in a previous Super Q&A. My answer right now is no, I have no plans to do it. Now, I'm giving you a firm no there, where I think most people would be tempted to say, oh, maybe at some point they'll do the whole it's on the table thing. Realistically, the audiobook was fun to record, and for the people who listened to it, they gave me a very satisfying, loving, wonderful response, and I'm proud to have done it. But in terms of time and how it like pushes my business, it's just not worth it. You know, all I can do for monetizing is a couple of ads, and they get almost 0 views. So, you know, there's basically like pennies coming in from ad revenue from recording and re-recording and tweaking for hours and hours and hours through an entire novel. I'd like to do it one day, but maybe when I'm a bit more financially stable and I feel like, you know what, I can spend a week on something creative and fun. My back doesn't feel against the wall. Right now, I don't feel like I'm in that place or anywhere near that place. So, it's not on the cards. You know me though, guys. I'm a bit of a completionist, and one day I might want that full set done. Because again, I liked it. I like that an idea of me as like an audiobook reader or whatnot, but you know, the realities of life get in the way, and I focus on other stuff. You know, for example, Arena announces a Cantha expansion, and I drop several plans to make many Cantha videos you've already seen, plus this series you'll be watching. Next, Kthro says, hi WP, post-Cantha, if indeed Guild Wars 2 is still popular enough that the developers decide to make a 4th expansion, what location of the world of Tyrian would you personally most like to explore next? My personal choice would be somewhere completely new and not previously visited, like the Wetlands continent. Yeah, I actually think this is very fun to think about, and on this note, we've seen on the map that it kind of feels like maybe the battle isles are sunk, and the movement of the world lore talked about the battle isles sinking and then maybe resurfacing or whatever. I feel like, and this idea and this observation doesn't appear in any of the Cantha videos I've done so far, I feel like it would be very cool if after the expansion itself comes out, probably in the Adjoining Living World episode, we do return to the battle isles. Now, the reason why I say that is because the Battle Isles were kind of Cantha linked, and that could be a really interesting setting. It's about appropriately sized, as in all the outposts and all the explorables and everything is about appropriately sized for a single Living World map in Guild Wars 2. So I think a Living World episode with Path of Fire, post-Path of Fire sized maps out of the Battle Isles would be a great idea. Just think about how like Dragonfall looks slapped out in the middle of the ocean. You could definitely do stuff there. If the devs took some creative liberties as well. In Guild Wars 1, you have the actual physical makeup of the Battle Isles. And then when you go to, say, random arenas and you hit Enter Arena, you are getting warped around to other places, like arenas set in Tyrian or whatnot. But there are a couple of arenas that didn't exist anywhere. Or like the guild halls, they didn't exist anywhere, but were supposedly in the Battle Isles. So I like the idea that they could do a literal re-implementation of the Battle Isles, but also maybe add a few new islands we can visit, and they're the ruins of the Guild Wars 1 guild halls. Or any other specific unique little maps that might be out there and I'm forgetting about at the moment. That would be awesome. And it doesn't even just have to be possible after Cantha, by the way. I think what might be even more interesting is the update immediately preceding Cantha's release, which we could be talking about late 2021, 2022, whenever, right? But if that Icebrood Saga, update is the Battle Isles, that would be a pretty cool like stepping stone to the expansion beneath. Remember how when episode 1 of Living World season 4 came out, it wasn't even an expansion, and yet they expanded the world map, they made it bigger? Well, what if they did that right at the end of the POF era, so to speak, with like the last update for the Icebrood Saga, where we expand all the way south, see the Battle Isles, and then Cantha 2. And going back to your more specific question about other continents after Cantha, there's something to think about as well, the world map art. Guild Wars' world, and by this I mean the playable terrain, the 3 continents, Tyrian, Alone, and Cantha. Guild Wars' world is very unique compared to most other fantasy game worlds or fantasy works, because it's super vertical. Like, it's narrow, and it's very tall. Most, fantasy works and map makers, they don't do that. They might to a certain extent, if you think about, like, Westeros, which was based on, like, the UK or Ireland, I think it was, except upside down, and then a bit of, like, France tacked on at the same time. So you kind of get this, like, long north-south map. But Guild Wars is to, like, a ridiculous degree. And that worked for the in-game map art in Guild Wars 1 because the 3 continents were sliced into separate regions, and you never got an impression of how tall it was. Well, here in Guild Wars 2, you're starting to already, with just this one campaign, figure out how tall it is. And you can see the devs are conscious about it, because when they expanded the map to the south with Path of Fire, they also expanded it a little bit wide as well, just so it wasn't so ridiculous. And we got like a view at that lake way off in the eastern lands, right? But clearly the devs don't want us thinking too much about those places. They probably don't have any plans for us to go to those places right now. And if you look with the final update they did to the world map, where they didn't even give us all of the Isles of Istan. Like, in-game, not all of the Istani Isles are there because they're so conscious about making this map too tall. Now think about Cantha. Cantha is going to, like, double this problem, because you're going to have a whole ocean, Battle Isles, in the middle of it, and then a whole continent all stacked directly to the south again. And we'll have this like wonky, weird up-down thing that the devs might not like. With all of that southern expansion, it's likely that to compensate a bit, the devs of Guild Wars 2 would widen the world map again a bit more. Either that, or they'll cop out of this entirely, and Guild Wars 2's Cantha will be its own map, just as it was in Guild Wars 1, which I wouldn't like very much, but could understand. So anyway, my point is that when we get to Cantha, then they probably won't want it to be so vertical. It will probably be expanded a lot left-right. And if it expands too much left-right, you are going to start seeing those other land masses. Like, properly see them. Not in like an Easter eggy, half-data mined, overly scrutinous way. You will see them blatantly on display there. And for that reason, I think maybe going to one of those locations would be a good candidate. Like, what about the lands called Gw2's to the bottom left? Aren't they kind of close? What about some places more on the Tyrian supercontinent? My personal favorite is actually way up to the northwest, the lands of that they called Dawn, I think it was. That's pretty exciting. And I thought in yesterday's video about an Empire Divided, they had that line that some of the women in the line of emperors who were skipped over in the path of succession were denied power because of the patriarchy. These women left, they ran away, and we don't know what happened to them. That's written in an Empire Divided. I like and if you remember, the big world map had that marker in a location way off on the other side of the Tyrian supercontinent, and the land was called or described just as misandry, man-hating, right? The reverse, the antonym of misogyny. So there's this land called misandry. I like the idea that it's these women from Cantha, and they know how to hate men and their denial of power, and they're like, all right, you've got your patriarchal society, look at what we can do. And they go off and they're at misandry. And I kind of like the idea that after we're done with Cantha, maybe we go to visit there. And looking at the kind of studio that ArenaNet is today, or at least outwardly appears to be, I feel like that's the kind of story and the kind of thing they definitely enjoy doing. Probably a good chunk of the community would obsess over it and rebel, so maybe not a good idea. But I don't know, I'm just interested in a cool fantasy setting, and that would be a coherent link to another area of the world. Not anywhere near us on the world map, though. I think a very cool story just around this comment out is the idea of an elder dragon fleeing from us. One of the last ones fleeing. I know we want them to be big and badass and interesting, but if it's the last one, I think that could be an interesting subversion and an unexpected place to go. You think that the last elder dragon is going to make this last stand, or has managed to absorb a ton of power or something in the meantime. But what if it's like, I'm out, bitches, and it runs really far away, and that's what takes us to another area, potentially. Especially if the whole Canthan expansion reveals to us that this is a society of proficient dragon slayers, and we have like this really crazy strong ally with us, and there's a bit of tension in whether they'll turn against us or something. Then the idea that we are literally hunting a dragon across the continent, we're on the prowl, is something Guild Wars 2 hasn't done yet. And they're going to be looking to exhaust every opportunity for something interesting to say when we get to those last few dragons. You know, already with Jawmag, it feels like we're treading on existing story. Anyway, so there you go. Next, we have a question from Connor, who says, what titles do you use at the moment? In Guild Wars 1, I think I'm using the Lightbringer title, just because I was in the Domain of Anguish for a video. You guys are not going to see that video for a while, but it's a Guild Wars 1 team composition video. Do you remember a bit back now, I did one on Energy Surge on my second channel, which looks woefully inadequate now because people have figured out the Guild Wars 1 meta so well these days that I look like some complete novice, but I will defend myself that Energy Surge hadn't fully caught on when I made that video. Not really. Well, I've done another video like that, but it's based around Ellie's. It's amazing, and I probably shouldn't talk to you guys about it right now because it'll be a while till you see the video. People on Patreon can see it now, obviously. But, yeah, for that, I put the Lightbringer title on. Can I just stop for a second as well and remark how alive Guild Wars 1 is at the moment? I don't really have a grander point, and I'm not trying to suggest something to you guys here about that you should return to Guild Wars 1 or that this is some failing of the sequel or whatever. But I will say that my conceptions of how small that community is have been completely destroyed the past 2 weeks while I've been playing the game a lot and shooting this new series with you guys. Like, the subreddit is really active. In fact, it feels more active today than it ever has. Maybe it's just because everyone's indoors and a lot of people have gone back to Guild Wars 1. I'm not sure that might be clouding it a bit. Kamadan is ludicrously active. People are buying and selling and trading and all kinds of stuff that I just would never have expected them to have been. There are people making like farm videos in 2020 and getting like 2,000-3,000 views a video talking about, you know, farms that were digested and figured out years back. That's kind of like what I was talking about earlier when I said, you know, I played Factions 9 years ago, and you think it's done, you think it's there, you think that resource is filled, but the internet doesn't work that way. The internet's really fluid, and everything's in one ear, out the other, and you just have to accept that. And so, you know, people are really interested in watching how to farm for basic drops and stuff in Guild Wars 1 to this day. There's like big audience there. Mind-blowing. And naturally, because I'm such a big fan and interested in the game at the moment, I really wish it was going to get an update. But hey, back to the title question. For Guild Wars 2, I think I'm still using Veteran on some of my characters. So, Veteran was a really basic, easy, lame title, pretty much. It's an example of everything I hate about titles, frankly, in Guild Wars 2. But it's also somewhat unique in that the number of people who were there to acquire Veteran right when Season 1 came out is dwindling. So I just kind of ironically used Veteran. Usually, if I've got a title in Guild Wars 2, I am doing it in a somewhat ironic sense. Sometimes I'll do it to match my fashion. And then my last resort usually is God Walking Amongst Men Mortals, because of my origins in GW1. And for many, many years, that was really all I had to connect me to Guild Wars 1. And here I am talking about how I've been playing it. How strange. Next question is from Stellaris, who says, Mount & Blade 2, Bannerlord is now in early access. It seems like a pretty good game for you to play, WP. Any thoughts? You love the Stellaris playthrough. Really curious how you find the Federation's expansion. You love it. I'm really sorry, but I have a total cop-out answer for this. I don't know anything about Mount & Blade in general, let alone Mount & Blade 2, Bannerlord. Sorry. Also, and there's not necessarily anything wrong with this, but when I read early access, I tend to get a bit flinchy. I'd rather wait most of the time. And then finally, we have a question from Aaron Banath, who says, Hey WP, about to watch the old Winds of Change playthrough because you're really feeling Cantha, exciting stuff. I'm glad to hear it. Winds of Change, if you're going to do anything in Guild Wars 1, Winds of Change is one of the best things I can recommend to anyone listening to this video. Yes, you probably know about the Factions campaign and the Plague, the Afflicted, the Shirokan, and, you know, just the general drama around Shiro Tagachi. You probably already know that. What you probably don't know or have forgotten about since you originally played is all the details of the Winds of Change, the rise of the Ministry of Purity, and the xenophobia in that continent. It's really well-made content, and frankly, that is the only content we got from that region of the world in which we know that ArenaNet, the studio, was specifically looking forward to a sequel game. When Factions originally came out, they did not have any ambitions for a sequel game. And so everything that exists there, really when you get down to it, was made just to be there for the then and now. Winds of Change was looking forwards, just like the Warring Kryta was, and the Warring Kryta ended up being relevant for a lot of Season 3 content. So Winds of Change is my main recommendation. It will feel like new stuff for most of you playing, and it is specifically interested in segueing us to Guild Wars 2. And I have a full series on it, which I'm glad that you're watching, Aaron, if people don't want to play it themselves. So they ask 3 questions, which I won't read fully out, but I will distill. The first one is, what are your long-term life goals? Be a game streamer, content creator all the way. Voice acting, narration. Do you have any large ambitions in life outside of Guild Wars gaming? So I really struggle with that last question because there are a lot of things I'd really like to be doing, but I always try and tie them into YouTube and find interesting concept for YouTube because I'm not really stable with YouTube. I don't really have like a career and a boss that I get some comfort in, so I can actually focus on them separately. Everything that I enjoy, I'm like, oh man, maybe I can package this in a way that I can show everyone else what's enjoyable about it, and then maybe that actually helps my work. And I get stuck in that all the time, which is probably a really bad idea. But particularly what that always leads me to thinking about is doing stuff outside. So I watch a lot of YouTube channels where they vlog traveling and just exploring and hiking and walking, and I love it. Mostly because I love doing it in real life. It's particularly around this time of year as well, where springs come in and it started to feel summery again. I really, really love the smells outside, the feel of the wind on my face, the sun beating down overhead, the sound of the birds in the trees, you go walking through the countryside or something. It's such a primal and wonderful, epic thing to me. And I've always wanted to find a way for that to be a big part of my life. And the idea of like making YouTube videos around that's very cool. The idea of having real life adventures and stuff. But I can't really think of a format, and I've thought many times about this, that would really translate into videos. And besides, the kind of YouTuber I am at the moment with the way that I run this channel, that's so far disconnected. The only tenuous connection is this idea of video games being adventures and the great adventure of outside, that realistically it's just not in the ballpark. And I always find myself wondering this, like, is this just something I love and shouldn't be a part of work? Or is this something I should make a part of work? And, well, so far, almost a decade into this, I have not combined the two, and I may never. Another question, though. What would I realistically like long-term? Well, the other thing I've really been into lately, and it actually depresses me to a certain extent, is I want to make a game, man. I feel like I've studied this franchise of MMOs and looked at other video games and other MMOs to a lesser extent for so long that I have a really strong idea of what I love about RPGs and about formats for selling RPGs and just games to people in general that is not being filled. I genuinely have this like perfect, incredible game in my mind, but absolutely no technical capability to deal with it, no management capability to bring other people on to do it, and no capital to fund it anyway. So it's depressing because it's like there is this beautiful golden thing that I really believe in my head, and the reality is that it will never exist because all the groundwork that would have to be laid to actually get something going, making a game from the position I'm in, would take so long that the market would have changed a lot by the time I get there, and my impulses as a person would have changed a lot and might not be in line with this thing that I'm currently in love with that's in my head. So I went to bed at night for many nights over the past year, and some of the things I'd think about before I fall asleep is like dreaming about classes in this game that I'd enjoy, or what kind of environments you could explore, or what the build craft would be like, and so on, and getting really happy and really excited about it, but it will never mean anything or go anywhere. And so I kind of had to cut that out in the end. I had to think, all right, you got to think about something realistic. And you know what I think is quite profound about all of that? I bet 90% of everyone on the planet has that. They have like that golden idea or that golden ambition and absolutely no power to do it. Your question 2 was what happens after the dragons are all dead or appeased and unreplaced? Where do you think the Guild Wars 2 franchise will go with its story and games? And more importantly, where would you personally like to see it go? Well, to me, I don't know if the franchise has much left for me after the Elder Dragon story. I think most of the really interesting stuff about this IP has been undermined by the Elder Dragon story in such a way that once the dragons are done, I would feel a little deflated. A part of it is that the Elder Dragon story is on such a massive scale that it then feels weird to be asked to invest in something much lower stakes. But I really don't believe that's everything. I think that people could get over that quite quickly, especially if we were dealing with an entirely new game, a sequel game that is deliberately on a smaller scale with lower stakes but characters that you can really invest in. But in general, I feel like the Elder Dragon stuff is most of what Tyrian has left to give now. They've really tied in most of the mythology and big questions into this story, and I've loved that and I've enjoyed that. But practically speaking, I do think that there is a shelf life on this setting. I really do. And I know that might sound crazy because I'm someone who's dedicated to myself to this setting particularly, and I love this setting so much. But I think for a franchise to have legs, it needs to be asking a question or presenting something that's really unique and keeps people coming back for more. Once we're done with the Elder Dragons and the Magic Crisis, what is Tyrian asking? Really? Generic conflicts between the people and societies that live there? Well, I could get behind that because I know so much about them. But the studio could deliver that to me with a totally new cast and a totally new setting that also feels fresh at the same time, and kind of puts a bow on Guild Wars. So you can say this is what this was, and it did what it was seeking to do. You know, I look at really good TV shows and I look at really good games that overstay their welcome, and they can ruin what was so amazing about them before. I'm a big believer in endings, and if ArenaNet found a way to be financially stable and producing something else that wasn't too risky, even without Guild Wars 2, I think the greatest service they could do to that is find a way to close the book. But that's just me. Some of you guys might feel like the franchise still has a ton to give. And finally, are any stories worthy of telling interacting with your fans in person? Like somebody recognizing your voice in public or a gaming event convention? Sounds like spotting a unicorn. Yeah, I do have a story actually at the Heart of Thorns event. Obviously, when I go to a Guild Wars 2 event specifically, you know, people will recognize me, and I'm quite a loud person, to be honest. I have had many comments before that people find it surreal to be around me in real life because they feel like one of my videos is playing in the back corner because my voice is blaring through a room and I have absolutely terrible volume control. But a more specific story, I do very much remember at the Heart of Thorns event. Before I'd done anything or met anyone, I was eating breakfast at the little hotel I was staying at. And someone came up to me while I was eating breakfast and said, "Oh my god, it's you," and we sort of had a quick little chat. And that's the only time in my whole life I had an interaction where someone of my age who was just a fan of this game, and it wasn't necessarily, I mean, it obviously was because we were in the same place because of the event, but it was just this coincidental thing, like a fan coming up to someone else. And it was something very weird and that I feel like I totally didn't deserve. But it was my little 2 seconds out of these 10 years where I had that moment. It was quite nice. So that's it for the Super Q&A, and what do you know, it actually took us plenty of time. I will say, over in the YouTube comments, a lot of you guys have been asking questions in the comments. I can't be more clear about this. This is for people on Patreon. But I do feel kind of bad that so many people asked a thing and then didn't get anywhere with it. So this video has already been long enough, so I'll just take one. But what I might do in the future is if there's a lot of thumbs up on some questions, I'll answer those from the YouTube comment section. So that feels like even YouTube people will have a chance of doing it. But really the idea is to hopefully get some people to sign up to the other website. So a comment with a lot of thumbs up. I was very happy to see actually was from Inks. So I hope you're doing good, dude. If you guys don't know Inks, he's another content creator on the scene. And he just said, how do you keep your interest up? How do you keep inspired? I've had creator's block for more than a year now. Well, I don't really consider what I do for the Guild Wars community in general to be creative. I consider it to be regurgitation more than anything else, you know. It's a repackaging of information people might otherwise miss with added context that hopefully the community itself and the developers themselves can stand behind so you get a more rounded experience. That's really what I'm doing. I don't really need to be creative for that. But I definitely know where you're coming from about this idea of creator's block and being non-productive. For me, if I'm going through these cycles, it's always a simple question of, if I'm making a lot of videos at that time in my life, it's easy to make more of them. I'm confident in them and I'm less obsessed and anxious about individual video quality when it's shouldered amongst a ton of others. When the channel itself is in a good place because there's a lot of videos, I'm not so scared to put out any kind of videos and I get more inspired and have more ideas. But if I'm at a place where I'm doing very irregular videos, you know, maybe there's only like 2 a week or so, even less than that, maybe I've been on hiatus for like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then I find it very hard to make videos because I feel like no one video is good enough to justify why the hell I'm on the internet talking about this thing. So how do I keep my interest up? By constantly trying to maintain at least something of a baseline. And as soon as I got that baseline going, it nearly always snowballs into more productivity and more things. You just gotta make a thing, and then you'll probably feel much more comfortable making another thing, and then making another thing, and making another thing. It's the same for actual gameplay too. Like I said, I'm very distant from Guild Wars 2 itself right now, because I haven't played it much. So, you haven't seen many videos on it. But when I get in there and have like a bit of a play session here, a bit of a play session there, my interest will return and it will snowball into something. So it's just taking that step to do something minor. It doesn't even have to be that productive, but to just like open a dialogue basically with yourself and your interaction with the product or your interaction with your work, and then you can let it flourish. That's kind of how I feel about it. Anyway, so there you go, guys. That's the Super Q&A. As of this video being posted, a new post is available up on Patreon where you can ask questions for next time. Also, while you're at it, if you get access to the drive, you can watch the conclusion of the Stellaris videos. You can watch the full faction series, or 15 of those. You can watch all the Tribulation episodes and the arena ones that will be going up later as well. So hopefully that feels worthwhile. I don't mean to push it too hard down your throat today, or believe me, I know, preach to the choir, but I am a little concerned with the coronavirus and a lot of people staying indoors. I want to feel like for people, if money is getting tighter, that they're really actually getting their worth out of this. Ideally, I'd like to slowly grow the campaign as the year goes along, so I don't end up in a dire situation. But so far, it has just returned to shrinking again since that initial push earlier. So I'm seeing what I can do. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's it. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think. Even if I don't respond directly to them in the next video, I will be reading all the YouTube comments as I did last time. So feel free to say hi and let me know what you think. Take care, guys. See you next time.